Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of BrickSide Chat, where we take your questions and turn them into conversations. My name is Evan.
And I'm Paul.
And I'm David.
And today, we're going to be talking about scaling and a few different ways you can scale your business. But before we get into that, I want to introduce our special guest, David West from DNA Bricks. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Awesome.
And so real quick, if you don't mind just giving a little backstory as to who you are in the space and kind of what you do as a business and everything.
Yeah, for sure. So, like they said, I'm David West. I run the BrickLink store, DNA Bricks. I started it in my bedroom in August of 2020, then quickly moved to a storage unit after running out of room. And I've been, buying a lot of used parts and sorting them out or hiring people to sort them out for years since then, and it's only gotten bigger, and now we're in a 5,400 square foot warehouse, and yeah.
Sounds like a success story.
Yeah, so far.
Yeah, definitely so far. We'll have to see. David is technically our competitor here, so.
But also a friend.
Also a friend, yes.
Friendly competitors, for sure.
Definitely one of my favorite things about the BrickLink space is the friendliness between all of our competitors, but the reason why we are here today is to try and get a better understanding as to how David has, in much shorter than Evan and I have been doing BrickLink, gone from just a bedroom to you said 5,400 square foot warehouse?
Yeah, I think that's what it is, if you include the upper offices. So.
And how many employees do you have?
7 right now.
7 employees. So
yeah.
Hopefully throughout this podcast, we are going to be trying to get a little bit of a grasp as to how the mind of David West, DNA Bricks, works.
Yeah, who's taken a very different approach in terms of scaling than we have. We've been on that like slow roll of we will, add one person here, one person here, one person here over the course of a year, whereas you in the past have gone, whoa, I want to make this big, and you've just like flipped a switch, and all of a sudden you have, you signed a new lease and you hired on a ton of people and grown drastically.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind ride for sure.
Yeah, I guess when you first started, and I guess when we first started too, is at a certain point you realize like this isn't just a fun thing to do. It's like a legitimate business opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to know, what kinds of things were you thinking about as you were expanding? And I guess this is also, I guess, a question for Evan too, is how can someone really truly get to know whether or not what they're doing should actually be scaling, outside of the question of whether or not what they're doing is profitable? Because we've addressed that in previous things as to like, how do you know a hobby from a business? But if you are running a profitable business, meaning you're generating more than you've put in, how do you start to realize that maybe it is time to start bringing on other people and stuff like that?
Yeah, for sure. I think a big thing to think about is your central role as the owner, or in your guys' case co-owners, is going to look a lot different in a model where you're scaling the business. Like for me, for example, there was the first months to about a year, I was the one doing everything. I sorted everything, I listed everything, and all the orders are backed by me. And it takes a big, I guess, mental switch to go from I can do these tasks when I want to versus I now have to teach people how to do them, or we're now in a building where I'm driving to work.
You lose a lot of the personal touch, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot less of a, I guess, side hustle, if you want to call it that, and it turns into a thing where you are upper management in your own previous side hustle that's now, like you guys said, an actual job. So
yeah,
right.
That definitely is true, where something that Evan and I have realized as we've grown is the amount of administrative overhead. Because the idea is you hire more people to do less work yourself, but that's not really what the reality is. The reality is you hire more people to do more work for yourself.
Yeah.
Because as you grow, you're going to have to spend so much time managing all of those people that I think that's really something that a lot of people maybe don't think clearly, or at least all the way through before they jump in and start hiring people, is you have to be willing to accept kind of the quality level that other people are going to do, because you're going to be so busy managing them.
Right. And I think for us, we haven't even got to where David's at yet, where it's like, because we still work at our house.
Yeah.
and a lot of people who work with us are like family or friends or something, where we have more of a connection with them versus they're just an employee. So that's kind of a hard balance. Plus we can like walk out of our back door and right into our garage, and we're quote unquote on property. So it's not like, I think where you have your own location and everything. And I think that has another separation of, side hustle / small business into like, this is real.
Yeah.
And it feels like you've taken that step. So I think for us, we will have a huge learning curve. And I think we've gained a lot from David and from Chris and from others who we've seen move out and do different things. But I think it'll be a huge jump for us when we actually move and realize even more so now than we are already, or more so than what we are doing now. There's like, we're going to pile more on top of our workload of administrative thingy, like random stuff. I don't know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, was there ever a time, I guess, for us, there definitely hasn't been, where we're like, oh, this is fine. This is where we want to be. We've always wanted to grow. As you were growing kind of in the same sphere here, did you want to, because you've gone back and forth, at least publicly, about the size of your business and stuff. I guess if you can give some advice in terms of your inner mental thoughts.
Yeah, for sure. I think a big thing is, again, like we said, like knowing when it's profitable to scale and when it's just scaling for scaling's sake. Like there have been times where I'm, profitable over a several month period, but it's like an opportunity comes up, and like it could be a new space or a new employee or something, and you have to decide, well, we are technically profitable now. Is it worth the risk? And like a lot of the times it won't even be, at least for me personally, it wasn't something where I was planning necessarily to scale in the way that I did. It just, an opportunity came up, and for better or for worse, I was like, well, I'm going to take this. And that sort of landed me where I am now, which is like a steep upward trajectory with probably higher risk than I'd like, but
right. And that's something we wrote down that we're gonna kind of go over, I think, is understanding that moment at which not only like when to scale, but also like you're ready for that commitment of scaling. And I think for the most part, maybe not everyone out there, I'm sure there's a point at which you hit and you're like, okay, this is great, I'm done. But from the day you start, hopefully everyone out there has been like, I want to get bigger. I want to grow. I want to do more. So you need to kind of understand if you just have that desire and you want to, or if you're like completely ready to. There's a lot to understand with scaling. And we kind of touched on a little bit of it with like the administrative stuff. You are now, let's say you started a business, and we'll go back to my little cabinet shop, Yes, nice. That's going to stick with this forever now. You are making cabinets in your garage at home, or even if you have a small little studio where you're building cabinets, you maybe are the only person there. But once you want to grow, and if you want to hire 3 other people who are like now coming on and they're also building, or maybe they're going out and they're selling the cabinets and trying to encourage people to purchase from you, you have all that administrative stuff, but also you need to understand you are moving from a position of probably being a leader of yourself and maybe one other person to probably moving to more of a boss figure. And obviously, you'll see those images of like, what are the inspirational things where it's like leader and boss, and the boss is standing on top of the rock while people are pulling it, and the leader is in front of the line and everyone's pulling the rock. And like, there's a line you have to balance on there.
But I think one of the big issues with that visualization there, and we have talked about leader versus boss before, but the issue is as you grow, it does become harder to be a true leader in the sense of knowing intimately every single little factor of what everyone's doing and providing personal inspiration to every employee on an emotional level. Yeah. Which is, really what the ideal leader should be doing. But eventually you do kind of become a boss where you're administrating.
Yeah. Well, and a boss needs to you need to put your foot down when someone's not doing their job. Yeah. If they're wasting money from the business or they're screwing things up, we haven't had too much of that, fortunately, I don't think. We've had things where we'd have to straighten things out, but nothing where we've ever had to let anyone go, to my memory, unless you know something, Paul. I don't think we've let anyone go directly without it being like a mutual, this just doesn't really work out for both of us. It's almost always been that. We've definitely had people we let go, but they are usually on the same page. I can't remember anyone who's been like, what?
No,
or
neither
surprised
can I.
or anything. So fortunately we've had that where it's like we're on the same page, but as a boss, you do need to be able to do that. If you are too much of a friend to everyone, there will be a point, I think, at which it really does hurt your business because you're just wasting resources.
Yeah, for me, there's definitely a balance because I'm always trying to develop like the work culture and be the leader and the boss, and it's really hard to be both. And going back to what you said, Evan, about like when somebody's not proficient or they're losing the company money, I think a big thing with becoming the boss and or a big thing to do if you're the boss but you want to also be the leader is to just not necessarily call them out but bring it up the first time it happens, because I've definitely seen it where I like let it slide and assume that somebody would fix it on their own, but and that's really just another overarching thing about turning into the boss at all is there are all these things about your business or our business or the business you own that are just second nature to you. And you actually do have to teach all these things, and you're not doing anyone a favor if you're just like giving them a pass that day. And when I actually have like adjusted over time to just get to the point where I'm stopping mistakes the first time, I realize like no one's going to be offended because like I'm doing my job and they're not doing theirs, which is to help them be the best version of their position.
Yeah. And as for knowing like when to scale, I guess how this kind of all ties into that is like whether or not you as the business owner feel that you're in a position where you understand things well enough that you are going to be able to accurately create procedures for people, definitely. Because as you grow and you start to bring people on and you start scaling, you're going to run into an issue, like David just said, where you can't easily assume that everything is obvious, right? And if you aren't willing to dedicate all of the overhead time, even before you start scaling, to try and figure out what some of those potential misunderstandings and roadblocks might be, then you're not really ready to scale. Like, obviously business is a continuously evolving process and your processes are going to change all the time. But if you don't have some kind of at least baseline thing and you just kind of wing it every day, then that's probably a sign that you are not ready to scale up.
And some things to think about when it goes about scaling, I think, are you a legitimate business? Because eventually you'll run into issues of like liability and taxes and things if you want to go out and do different things. Is everything based on your personal credit, or can your business start to build credit, things like that? Are you prepared to be handling significant amounts of money or significantly higher amounts of money? Maybe you're no longer making $5,000 a month, it's like $30,000 a month. Not that that's all in your pocket, but that needs to be adequately spent on the proper things in terms of overhead and obviously all the things that goes.
Something to bring about that is it might be a shock that your margins might go down in terms of the total percentage as you grow, because your labor's probably pretty cheap. But as you grow, you start paying rent, you start paying payroll taxes, you start paying for insurance and workers' comp, and all of those things are going to eat into that percent. Now, hopefully the total dollar amount is growing, but you have to be prepared that just because $30,000 came into your checking this month, or it came into the business's checking this month, that does not mean that $10,000 is just going to go in your pocket. I mean, that would be awesome, but you might be operating on a lot closer margins, especially as you start to scale. It's going to be close for a little while there.
For sure. And going off of that, like in terms of the, I guess, intangible like legalities of things that need to set up, you also need to like physically have space for, if it's scaling in terms of labor, like people to work and maybe company devices or things like that you might not necessarily think about because it's only been you and a few other people. Whereas now, like if there's a task that needs a certain tool, you've got to buy 5 more of those, and that's another cost. Or you need room for all these people to work, or you need to buy toiletries, which you didn't have to do because there's just that much more going on in the space. So definitely, like there should be a checklist of the I guess, legalities or risks to like square away first, but then there's also just do I have the time and the money and the space to train these people and get them integrated into the system.
Right, and most of that will fall on your shoulders on your, the first big scale. Maybe eventually you have a manager who can start taking care of that stuff, but buying all the stuff for like paper towels, any material usually falls on the owner at the beginning, at least, until maybe have some sort of administration or administrator position or something that someone else can do that. But that's that kind of stuff with the workload. Sometimes your hours will go up as you scale, and you may not see more from those hours going up. It's just something that's necessary for a while.
Yeah.
And as you scale, you might start doing things or stop doing things that were really fun with the business as well. Not to say those aren't getting done, but generally those tasks might be being passed on to someone who can do them because it's less of a skilled task or something. And you get to sit and crunch numbers all day or whatever that might be.
Definitely.
And then a big thing, we've all, I think, kind of been there at a point or we are now or whatever, is when you scale up, it gets harder to go backwards. So Paul and I have always mentioned that, we, to an extent, miss the days of like just being able to walk in the garage and see like four sets that are sealed on the shelf and be like, you know what, I'll part those out today. Versus now you walk in, it's like there are things that have to get done because there are others relying on you versus just the customer. You have employees now that you need to make payroll every week or every other week or whatever you do. There's a lot of things that kind of make it difficult to
it's not a game
scale
anymore.
back then. Exactly. It's not we've talked about the hobby versus the business and stuff, and there's a huge, it's hard to find a point at which you determine, I'm really a business. We've even been like, are we still in that hobby tier of like, and I don't think we are, but there's that weird thing there.
And again, just all the administrative tasks piling up is something I really can't understate. Is just like, if you're wanting to scale, you have to, and I never did, like, expect the like day-to-day things that you do 5 minutes here, it turns into an hour here or 2 hours there. Like, I've got to track these expenses, or I need to reorder supplies, and there becomes so many different things that you have to keep track of, and it's something where scaling fast will reward you financially, I mean, in theory, because you're going to be that much more productive, but there's all these unforeseen, basically time sinks that you need to either allocate quickly or you're going to just get eaten up in the machine of your own business, and you're not even doing, like you guys said, like the thing you were doing originally.
Right, your job is no longer what it was 2 months ago because all of a sudden it switched.
So I guess kind of drilling it all down is, before you start scaling, you really need to have like a predetermined plan for how you're going to delegate everything, and do your best to come up with some kind of a checklist of some of the expenses that you don't pay now that you might need to be expending, like you said, paper towels and all that kind of stuff.
Jazz. Yeah. And going into that too with expenses is the age-old argument of cash flow versus leveraging debt. And I think this is something you guys have mentioned before on previous episodes, and definitely I've seen going on in the Just Brick in the Bucket Discord as well, is there's like two pretty firm camps, I guess, of like, I want to pay everything cash and I'll just let the scaling come naturally. But I personally have used debt, and I'm currently paying off a loan to leverage certain opportunities, because it does make sense to, and it's admirable to not have debt. But if there's an opportunity where you are better off in the end, having paid off the loan, even with the interest and all that comes with it, I think you should definitely jump on that and look at potential debt as a resource, but never as something to do just for the sake of having more cash.
You should not have your debt be the cushion that's going to get you out when something goes wrong.
Yeah, take on debt if you have an expenditure that you need to spend because of, or like that. What am I saying? Take out a loan or something on purpose, not because you just want like some extra cash to
not because PayPal called you and they
every dollar.
Right. Not because people are exactly.
You should have a plan for how every dollar that you take out is going to generate you more than the dollar plus interest.
Yeah,
100%.
Ideally.
What are some of the signs, like as you're growing, right, or as you're growing in your apartment or your cabinet shop or whatever, and
cabinet shop,
you're starting to wonder whether or not you should be scaling? We've talked a lot about what are some of the resources that you need to accumulate, but like how should you actually make a determination as to whether or not scaling is the right decision for you? Because it might be fun to be a manager, but not every business and not every individual is gonna actually require scaling out like that.
Yeah. For me, it was a combination of I no longer have the hours or the willpower to work the hours required to keep everything up on my own. So that's how it started was, I'm now getting so many orders I don't have time to sort raw material, so I'm going to delegate that out. Another thing is, if there are tasks that you believe, maybe aspirationally believe nonetheless, like, somebody else could be doing this, I could teach someone to do this, and with my time I could do the more profitable task of X, Y, or Z. If that's something you can recognize, then that might be a signal that it's time to hire someone, or it's time to move to a new space. Like, for example, if you're out of room, which has happened to me the 3 times now.
Definitely where we're struggling right now is the space is tough.
Yeah, it's a big one to balance, and it's similar to the debt thing of like the overhead just goes up right away, and you can rationally think about it from a number standpoint, but just having that pressure to generate revenue that's going right into rent right away is a different ball game. And then another one too is, if you have money or capital that's being unused, then I mean, theoretically a business is going to put the capital to work to get more in return.
I mean, not to get too political here, but as inflation is in the current state it's in, it's going to be a lot better for you rather than just having cash sitting around to hopefully be doing something with it. And so I think it's definitely a sign that you need to expand. If you just have lots of cash sitting around, then you aren't cashing it out. Because obviously, if you're running a business to generate money for yourself to spend, and you're not spending it, then that's why you're not spending it. But if you're running a business to run a business to hopefully generate even more money in the future, and then you just have cash piling up in accounts somewhere, I wish that was a problem I had, then that is definitely a sign that you should be putting that cash to work, because otherwise it's just going to depreciate sitting there in your Wells Fargo account.
And maybe a final signal to either look at scaling or not scaling is competitors, and what are the other people in the industry doing. And for a space like BrickLink, it's usually a case of if my competitors like you guys or like Chris are doing well, that's actually signaling to me that I probably should scale, because the market or the industry as a whole is up. Whereas maybe in other fields like the Evans cabinet business, if somebody else in the city is like on the up and up, and he's got all these new clients, he's got billboards everywhere, it's maybe not the same kind of thing where it's like, if he can do it, I can do it. You gotta determine if they're taking away market share or increasing the overall size of market share to be had.
Yeah,
definitely.
And something like what we do right now in terms of selling pieces is the majority of customers are purchasing multiple times a year.
Yep.
If we go to the cabinet analogy, ideally people aren't remodeling their kitchen or bathroom multiple times a year. It's a once every 10, 15, however, whoever, depending who they are and stuff. So that's not a very common thing.
As a cabinet shop owner, you should be hoping they're doing it multiple times a year.
Of course, but the reality is they're not. So if there is that competitor that's kind of taking over the entirety of the market, like, you can try to expand, but you need to understand that if they have this insane special that's, the whole city is getting their kitchens redone, well, for the next 15 years, no one's going to get their kitchens redone.
Quit while you're ahead, I guess, would be the thing. If there's someone...
Or stick at the size you want. It doesn't mean you're going to go out of business.
Quit while you're ahead, or stay in your own lane.
Exactly, yeah. Or if you could, diversify in some way. And we'll talk about horizontal versus vertical scaling in a minute, but that could be another option as well. So go ahead. Sorry.
When you start scaling, obviously there's actual actions that have to occur. And I guess for us, some of the first signs, because I guess maybe a whole point over all of this is that sometimes scaling just happens. We've given a lot of examples of how you should know whether or not you're scaling and whether or not you should decide to, but more often than not, and I think David might be the same here, it just kind of happens overnight.
Yeah.
And
we talked about it in an episode of, I don't remember when, but it was like where you had to move into the house. It wasn't because you made that conscious decision. It's because the business forced you to do that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And where I was going with this, if I can remember properly, was that your physical operations begin to change, and there's kinds of two ways that you can be going about it. Is you can start processing more, and this is obviously, we run a very processing heavy business. So for someone else, it might be serving more clients versus delivering a higher standard of quality to your customers and then charging more for it. But as you start to expand, something that you need to be keeping in mind is, am I building out the correct facilities for the type of market that I want to be in? Like working faster, processing more, etc. Like as you start to expand, you're going to be making decisions about where you want to be allocating your limited resources. And I don't know, I guess what's your guys' opinion in terms of whether or not it's better to pick something to try and improve, like a specific physical operation to begin scaling out, or whether it's better to just kind of try a whole bunch of things all at once?
I guess for me, just speaking like in retroactively, what has happened is it's generally been the latter, where we're constantly changing the way we're doing things in hopes that one day we'll find the one that's the way to do it. And there's a joke around the warehouse that you can be perfect, but we never will be, which is not a pessimistic statement. It's more of an optimistic statement. Like, we should be happy when things are going well, but we should also be looking at things that we might not have reevaluated in a while. And there definitely is a balance, especially in terms of scaling and just, I guess, innovating within the company in general. Is like, when do you let something ride out for a few months to see if it's going to pick up, and when do you just full stop 180 like I've done many times, and just like, okay, now we're picking one order at a time, and now we're back to picking 20 orders at a time.
Right.
So there's a balance to be had, and I think it just comes with time, at least for me, because definitely in the last 6 months, I've had probably a dozen like business course altering announcements that I've had to make. So there's something to be said about going slow versus like what Paul was saying, and just like throwing all these things at the wall and seeing which one sticks.
Yeah, and I think we've taken a slightly different approach than David, where, we go like, okay, we look at the entirety of the business to see what's not working, and then like about a year ago, we were like, okay, contractors, we need to scale up, and then what do we need to do in order to make this specific thing work?
Yeah.
And then we like really drill down on that and get that to what we believe is working. And then it's like, okay, that generally leads to us realizing a whole different thing is not working.
Yeah.
It's almost, for us, I feel like a domino effect. One thing gets kind of quote unquote fixed or solutionized or whatever. And then that tips over and it hits another thing, and we're like, oh wait, this also needs to do it. And we kind of go less than just, and I think part of this is we've talked about, just between the three of us, the business partners, we're always talking to each other, where you can just make that decision to make a change,
which is a blessing and a curse, because like I don't have to answer to anyone. Like I'll consult my employees and my managers, but at the end of the day, it is up to me, which is, like I said, a blessing and a curse. Whereas you guys can talk it out.
We talk it out, and we have to talk it out too.
Yeah.
It's not like we can make a drastic change. It's
Totally.
It has to be a relatively mutual agreement.
The benefit of that is when we do decide to like implement a new scaling tactic or whatever, is usually, hopefully, more thought out than if just one of us had done it. But the alternative is that it took us 3 months to get to that
exactly
point.
And I think that's also part of the reason we've grown so slowly. Like if just you owned the business,
the business would not be here.
Okay,
no, I understand.
You understand what I'm saying, though.
Yes,
It'd be
yes.
like, you would make that change, and then you make a change, and then you make a change, just like David does, where it's like you can go in that crazy cycle. I don't like consider, if you put our two businesses currently parallel to each other, it's like, in terms of success of dollars, you totally see it with yours. And then you mentioned the other day, you felt though that we were more organized and prepared to be the size of you versus what you were before you were the size of what you are now.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are things that I could have I mean, I don't even know if I could have prepared for them though, because it was mainly just a case of you don't know what you don't know, and all of a sudden, like with labor is a big one, is what Paul was saying earlier. Your margins are going down because your overhead is now thousands of dollars a month or thousands of dollars a week. Yeah. And the first whatever, these are just numbers. The first 10,000 in sales you make a month are going right into expenses. So it's definitely something where I'm glad my business has ended up where it has so far, but there are definitely things that you guys have implemented and thought out more than I have, even though I'm already been doing them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And that's again, I think that's part of the blessing and the curse of two versus one.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And we already kind of talked about, and you just brought it up again, the labor decreasing margins, but there are a lot of other considerations into labor. Now we are talking a lot about labor here. Obviously there are some business models where labor is going to be substantially less important, like if you are providing a cloud service and you're the sole developer. But within the company, something that you are really going over, and we haven't had to face yet, is the company culture aspect of growing. Yeah. And not to put you on the spotlight here or interrogate you, but if you have a little bit to talk about your current thought process and in the past maybe what you've done right or wrong. Once again, don't want this to be an interview.
Yeah, no,
you have
for
more
sure.
experience.
I think just knowing ahead of time when you're hiring people on, like, I guess workplace norms is a big thing. Like, are we all, like, what's going on here? Are we all colleagues? Are we all friends? Like, is this like we're all at school, we're all hanging out, or are we all trying to get work done? And for a while, I think DNA Brick struggled with that, with an identity of like, what are we all here to do? And what do I as an individual, not necessarily me, but all of them, how does it work into it? And it's hard. It's hard to get a I guess answer, and with that comes too like the I guess the disconnect between potential employees, between each other, between the managers. There's like a million different ways to communicate within the company, and we have to we pin down like how it looks. And it started way different than it is now, where we actually have meetings and we know what we're coming into work to do. Whereas in the beginning, I was just hiring people and saying, all right, I guess today you should work on this. That feels right.
For us, one of the biggest culture issues has definitely been communication and repetition of communication.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Where
when
things
we
seem to get lost in translation.
Yeah.
Right.
Even though from our perspective, it's been said a million times, that kind of illustrates that saying it 1,000,001 times might not be the path forward. It might be that there needs to be a more low-level change as to how communication happens within the company. And that's something you're going to have to consider as you scale out, is if you especially scale, quite large, and you no longer are able to talk to every employee in your facility, how are you going to ensure that all the middle managers are flowing the correct information? Because now you have two potential places where it can be misunderstood.
Yeah, and a big thing is if somebody who is like, let's say the lowest level, whatever that looks like, asks like the owner or a middle manager a question, are those answers going to be the same? And will they be answered the same way? And like, what is the disciplinary, I guess not disciplinary action, but like what is what does it look like when one manager calls out a mistake versus another? And it's something that you should really get down in writing, or at least verbally agree upon between all the people who are responsible for a given employee, is these are the expected tasks, and these are how we address things that aren't optimal, I guess.
Yeah, and that's something Paul and I have kind of had to end up, like we, for a while, fulfillment, at least probably last summer is when we kind of realized there was an issue, was like, I would be there sometimes, Paul would be there sometimes. So we'd have this weird balance of, I might go in and have some rule or something, and then Paul might go in and have some different rule, or maybe it's even, actually this happens a lot. It's the same thing. We're saying the same thing, but we're saying it 2 different ways, and then it confuses people.
Yeah.
Like you and I remember this was even recent. We were talking about bags and like our bagging policy as, if this order is only this big, you use these 2 bags because it fits in a box better, so it's cheaper in the long run. You were talking about the same bags I was talking about, but it was miscommunicated just because you and I didn't go over and like physically hold the bags up to the person we were talking to.
Yep.
So one of our pickers was bagging things one way because you had said medium bags or whatever, and the other picker was bagging them in large bags because I said large bags, but you and I really meant the same bag, and their interpretation was wrong. So we've even had that where, you know, we've started to split. I am fulfillment, so people can come to me if it's like a specific issue, and obviously if Paul's there, he can ask. But generally now you'll even check with me just to make sure you're giving the right info.
Yeah.
We had a problem the other day where you called me on the phone and you were like, I feel like I'm out of the loop, but I thought we were talking about this. And like we were on the same page, but you just checked just to make sure we really were, because even between 2 owners, there's this weird, like, not really miscommunication, just a concern of, we've had so many things in the past that are the same, but they're different. So it's like, we got to make sure. And that's part of us not writing down like a true standard operating procedure where someone can go read through a book.
Yeah.
And, you know, we did start that, but the truth is people
still did not understand.
Yeah, and they don't go back to reference that. If you want to look up something, how to do something in your car, do you ever really flip out your car user manual or whatever it's called, or do you go Google it or something, or you just ask someone who might know? Like, it's something like that. So it should be written down so we are on the same page and we're communicating it the same way.
And another thing with stuff like that, with like standard operating procedure or employee handbook or whatever these things in writing are, is like going along with the scaling is, do I have to rewrite this whole thing in a month? And what's the upfront cost of me getting all this in writing now and then realizing maybe while I'm writing it or a week later, oh, all of this is wrong. So it's for me, I always struggle to write things down because I don't want to like settle on permanence when something could potentially be better. But at the same time, you need something to reference in the moment, even if it's not for sure going to stay that way.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of things that change as you grow that you don't want to have to do twice. And that's always something we're talking about too, is like this argument of, if we do this now, then we don't have to do it later. And it's like, well, do we though? And should we spend all this time? And so that's always kind of a frustration point, I think, between us. And moving on to like, if you are scaling, something else that, you know, we talked about kind of redoing this standard operating procedure or whatever, spending more time. Something else is like a supply chain type situation where if you're a lot larger and you're selling, let's say you're we'll go back to the cabinet thing always. If you're building these cabinets, do you have the supply chain to be able to purchase that material that you need in order to build those cabinets, paint those cabinets, etc.? Or for us, obviously, it's like if we decide to go move somewhere, and let's say rent is $4,000 a month or something, can we make that $4,000 a month back? Or are we going to, just because our supply chain can't support us, are we going to stay the same size we are, even though we have so much more room because we don't have a better supply chain or a better understanding or anything like that?
Because when you first start out, you might be able to purchase things. This is going to be a bad example because professional companies do use Home Depot, but we'll just pretend like if you first start your cabinet shop here, you might go to Home Depot and purchase some stuff. But as you grow, you can leverage your size to be able to get access to potentially a more direct supplier. And you can be ordering these things at a substantially cheaper price and increasing your margins that way in order to pay your labor, which is now substantially higher. And so as you grow, it is very important to know every layer of where your goods are coming from, because you don't want to get into a situation where you're like, oh, I just spent $100,000 on all these expansion costs and there actually is not enough material on the planet to process because I was unaware that I'm in a super niche business here. Like the demand might be there, but the raw materials might not be.
Yeah.
That's actually something we didn't, I don't even think we wrote down. I mean, maybe it's somewhere on this, but the demand and like the market cap for your industry.
Yeah.
I guess we talked about it sort of with if you have a cabinet and the other guy blew up or something, but like, are you trying to expand too much where there's not even a market that you can sell to? That would be a pretty big problem.
That's something that's hard to feel out as well. And I think at least in our like shared space of BrickLink, I've said it before, I don't think anybody is there yet. And Paul and I were discussing this just the other night, is like, what is the actual limiting factor? And I'm not entirely sure what it is, but it definitely could be what you said, is like your your pick path or whatever gets too long, that you can't actually process orders fast enough to make it profitable, or is the limiting factor, like we were saying, the supply chain. Like if you are prepared to get all these goods to like 10x the amount of customers, you need to make sure beforehand that you can actually produce the final product.
Yeah, exactly. And majority of that, maybe not majority, but actually I think everything we've talked to kind of goes into that. It's like, do you have the labor to do it? Do you have the supply chain to do it? Do you have the physical facilities to be able to do all that? And then the means of delivering that product or whatever that service is. It all needs to line up.
Exactly. I think it's really the big thing is you need to plan it out, because if you buy all the supply chain, you might run into, or if you buy all the supply, not buy the supply chain, you buy all the supply, you might run into a problem Evan and I are experiencing right now, which is our backlog. We're so space confined, we can't scale out in space, that we have product that's just sitting unlisted because we don't have the ability to list it in our finite space. So that could theoretically have been avoided if we knew that, if we planned our moving out policies a bit more strictly and knew about some other things that we were spending money on, that we would potentially not be able to move out at a certain time. And so if you go ahead and decide to scale, you need to make sure that you're not going to be having a backlog of any kind at any step, because especially if you bring people on salary, you can't just send them home. They're still going to be you're still going to be paying them even if you have nothing to process. So
yeah, and that's partially the benefit to, I think, an hourly worker. Like if something happens, it's just sorry, we have to lessen your hours. Ideally, that's not what you want to do, but bringing someone on, and this is not something we've ever talked about, I don't think. It's like, I don't know if you do or not, but bringing someone on as a salaried employee versus an hourly employee, and paying them per week based on just an amount of work they're supposed to get done versus paying them hourly for what they're doing. I don't.
Do you have anyone salaried?
Not at the moment. So everyone is paid hourly, but I'm always looking for ways to sort of incentivize productivity and increase their pay while also remaining profitable. And I'm sure salaried positions could and I hope would develop in the future. But at this point, like Evan was saying, there's just so many volatile aspects of what we're doing that I can't guarantee 35, 40 hours to everyone who might want it. So just scheduling week by week until we get to a point where we've exploited the supply chain, you said, or we've guaranteed this amount of tasks to be done, is something to look out for. No, you go ahead.
So I think at least the last thing in this little section of like what scaling should kind of look like. A big thing I think is managing your frustration with scaling, and understanding what it is and stuff. I don't know if you want to kind of start go into that a little.
Yeah, you are going to mess up.
No.
Yeah, I know. I like to always come in with these huge, big statements then just say absolutely nothing of consequence.
No.
But the more surface area that you have to mess up, the higher chance that any given spot is going to fail. And so when you have 100% of control over every aspect because you're working in your room, any failure that happens is, one, almost certainly your fault, and two, could potentially have been prevented by you. However, as you grow and the complexity of your business expands, it gets harder and harder to anticipate everything, and you have to have an acceptable margin of error. You have to understand that or something in your business is going to fail one day or another. And it might be a minor thing, like it's just a machine breaks down for one day and then you incur an extra $500 to get it fixed, right? Which is hopefully not business ending, but that just hurt your output for one day. But that might cause you to get very frustrated. And if you were working by yourself, maybe you would be rightfully very frustrated because it's potentially your fault or it's potentially something that you could have been aware of. But as you grow, you have to be able to kind of have this Zen attitude of accepting that, okay, my allotted failure for this month has occurred. I have the resources ready to fix this problem and then move on, figure out what happened, address it, do your best to make sure it doesn't happen again, but don't explode. Now, if you're continuously running into failure over and over again, then you might want to get frustrated, but you don't want to, in the words of Master Yoda, let your anger cloud your judgment. So you don't, especially with employees, right? Because
they're never going to care as much as you do.
Yeah.
That's a huge...
They're never going to care, and they're never going to know everything. And they're never going to get something right the first time or just know something offhand.
And they also shouldn't. You should have your expectations. We're not trying to down talk employees because honestly, it's not their job to know the whole business. And I mean, maybe if you're hiring a CEO, well, even then a CEO is supposed to be, in charge of execution tasks, right? You have your CTO and your CFO to manage, technology and finances, right? You have all these other positions too. And so as you grow with employees, you have to understand that you should expect them to know within their field, assuming you've trained them well, but expecting them to know that this tiny little thing is going to inconvenience Joe in accounting, it's not really right for you to get mad at them about that. And the answer to this might be, educate them on everything. Well, that drastically reduces the amount of people that you can hire because the amount of people who are willing to not own their own business.
And it's impossible, I think, to even once you have like 10 employees, I'd say it's impossible to, unless everyone's doing the exact same thing, which I think is really rare for a business. You can't train 10 people on everything. It's impossible. Like it doesn't make any sense.
It's not something you should or could aspire to do.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think that really is about like managing your frustration in the sense of you need to be determining when you should be expressing frustration, never anger towards an employee, but there is a time where you need to let them know like, hey, you're causing a problem.
Yeah.
But you need to know when you need to take a hard tone versus when you need to take an educational tone or just not say anything. You were talking about always identifying mistakes, but there are certain things where it's like someone is not doing it perfectly. Well, are you paying them a perfect wage to do it perfectly, or are you paying them to operate at a 95% efficiency, right?
And get it done.
Like
you step back from the frustration or the perfectionist mindset of somebody who owns the business and knows everything, and say, well, did it get done? Was it maybe slower than I would have liked? Yes. But is this something that I could sink even more time and make it effectively slower by addressing? Maybe it's time to just move on or whatever that may be. And really just being attentive to issues and concerns that employees or peers or whatever bring up is key there. And if somebody brings something up and you're now inconvenienced because you have to teach them something, it shouldn't be a frustration like you were saying. It should be okay, I'm glad we figured out that not everybody knows this, so now I can, in the future, hopefully, get it in writing or whatever that may be.
It's an opportunity for investment.
Yep.
Because ideally, your employees are an asset and they're an appreciating asset. And so every opportunity to help appreciate them more quickly is a good opportunity.
Yeah, so we've talked about kind of knowing how to scale, what potentially scaling looks like and stuff. So now we should probably talk about maybe actually how to scale, or some thoughts to have at least when you're in the process of scaling. I think one big thing, and this is something that, again, I think the two of us as business have done slightly differently, is kind of that planning and understanding.
What's that?
Exactly. Kind of planning ahead and really understanding what the future could look like if you do this direction. Not to say like you've done none of that, but in terms of what we kind of quote unquote build out, and we never quite follow the plan accordingly 100%, but like that's what we've really tried to do. So usually you want to plan out and build that plan, but also understand that plan's probably not going to go 100%. You can be, really, 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 really good at what you're doing, and something in your plan is still probably going to change. So be flexible when something does change, and maybe have I don't know if you need a plan B, plan C, etc., but like have some ideas as to what you might need to change from that, and use that as a learning experience, because just because one little thing of your plan failed does not mean your entire expansion is going to completely fall apart.
I'll go ahead. I think, like you're saying, you've got a plan. You should also, again, going back to one of the first points, is just know why you're scaling and what's going to enable you to scale. Like knowing your strengths or your company's assets and how you can continue to exploit them or exploit them further in the next stage of scaling. Like if you're just going into a new place and you're like, oh, I could get so much more done here, but you don't actually have a reason to move, or you don't have a substantial amount of evidence that points to in the new space you could be having a much higher output, there's something to think about there as well.
Yeah, and understanding the opposite of that, you know your assets, but you could also have a lot of liabilities when you're scaling, and understanding those. And
go ahead. Sorry. A liability is not just necessarily something that's depreciating or costing you money. A liability can be an intangible. You can have just like you can have intangible assets. You can also have intangible liabilities.
The
like
X factor, the Z factor.
Yeah. Like I think we've brought this one up before, but if you have, like, let's just say you only have one arm or something like that, and that might inconvenience you. That's nothing that you can objectively fix, but you can be aware of it because that's just a part of who you are. And you can then build strategies in order to limit the cost of that liability, right? You can implement strategies to try and become more efficient at every other. If there's a specific task that you just know, okay, I can't actually get better at this, you can look at how you can make everything else more efficient to just eat the cost of that thing and not lose more money. I mean, sure, it'd be great if you could fix it, but there are some things you can't. And identifying the difference between something you can't fix, something that is not worth fixing, and something that is hard to fix but is worth it, is also an important part of scaling.
Yeah, and something that David has said, I think only since you've been here visiting, or you probably said it, but you've said it to us at least once you've been here visiting, is you hit what you aim for, so you have to have a target. And you also said this the other night, was like something to do with like your target versus someone else's target or something.
That was one of the ones.
That was good.
It's I can't remember word for word, but it's you hit what you aim for, so have a target, and aiming at someone else's target won't get you closer to hitting yours. Yeah. So like if somebody else is scaling in a different way and they're successful, but you don't see that as something that's necessarily valuable, there's no reason to compare yourself in that way or whatever it may be.
Just because everyone else is doing something does not mean that it's good. I mean,
not consolidating.
There might be a good chance that it's good since everyone seems to be doing it and doing okay, but you should investigate, okay, why? Because it might be that it is a good idea, but you can do it better. Or it might be that it's a waste of your time.
Right. Now, how can scaling go wrong? Obviously, there's a your business probably has a point at which it can't grow anymore. And if you try to exceed that point, you can start to run into issues. But also, even if you're not at that point yet, you're just trying to grow right now, you can still run into issues. So one of the biggest things with scaling is like if you take on all these other liabilities and debts and you owe people money and you're buying more material and stuff, but for some reason you're not selling enough product, you're not going to have enough cash flow to pay your balances and stuff. So that's a huge one, is just taking on that risk and then that risk not paying off because the money for some reason didn't come in. And obviously there's a variety of reasons it may not come in, but starving your business of cash is a colossal problem. Like that's very, very bad. So that's an option as to what could go wrong, obviously.
Don't leverage out more, or don't take out more debt than, I mean, you can do whatever you want, but don't take out more debt than you can liquidate for, would be another thing I would potentially say. At least that's kind of our guiding principle, has been like, never have more outstanding than we could theoretically pay off in a worst case scenario.
Exactly. And another thing that can go wrong that we've talked about before is sort of related to potential new hires or employees not knowing everything, is they're not going to have the same drive or the same passion to see this thing that in my case I've created or that you've created, flourish and be the best that it can be. Like at the end of the day, there are benefits and consequences to being both the owner in the situation and the employee. And one of the benefits for the employee is they're not financially liable or whatever. It's like sometimes it is better to be the guy who's just coming in and getting hours and getting paid for those hours, whereas us or you or as the owner have to actually maybe take on more hours or replace somebody, or all of a sudden you're doing something you haven't done in a year because for a while that position was filled. So there are several things that can go wrong, but I think if I had to boil it down for the employee side of it, is like not everyone is going to be as dedicated as you are. Yeah. And people will leave and things will go wrong.
Yeah. And something with that is, and you and I have had a discussion about this, Paul, is, no one employee, it is never one employee's fault why your business failed.
Yeah.
It's the weight of the success of the business should never be on their shoulders. It's always on the shoulders.
And if it is, then that's your fault.
Yeah, it is totally. That's a big problem in my opinion, at least. I guess there's probably companies where that is the case,
even then, that's probably not an intelligent decision, because if there really is someone that is absolutely incontrovertibly essential to the business, then maybe the most intelligent decision is to make them a co-owner, so that way they have that, leverage. Yeah. Like, I can't think of any situation where a business should be completely reliant on a single individual that cannot be replaced.
But not even that. Just the concept of like telling an employee that the business is on their shoulders. Like they should never feel that way. In terms of like feeling like if they leave or if they screw something up, that the business fails because of them, and you as an owner, I don't think want to project that onto them. I think that's really bad for morale.
You do also want to do the inverse though, and say that their success
and of course they help and grow the business, and what they do can hurt the business, but never should they feel that the business is completely on their shoulders.
Or that it's all on them to make sure we clear overhead or we pay rent.
Exactly. Because it's not. It's the business owner's fault that you're in that situation, et cetera, whatever, I mean, is there anything kind of closing this out that we've
be smart but be brave. if I had to say, like there are very real risks involved, but if you are, at least like the thing Paul brought up, if your worst case scenario is leaving with net cash 0, then at least you're not in debt, or at least you're not personally liable. So I would say be passionate, and the really big thing I think we're trying to boil down is scale with purpose. Don't just do any of this for the hell of it.
Yeah, definitely. So I think then we're pretty much done. So thank you to everyone who is either watching this on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast platform. As a reminder, if you want to get involved and comment and stuff, you can go over to our YouTube channel. It's called Just a Brick in the Bucket, and you can comment and give us some ideas as to what you might want to hear about in another episode, or you can explain to us how you've scaled, or maybe how you haven't scaled and the reasons why and stuff.
You can also check out David West on YouTube.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for listening, and thanks guys for having me on. It's been fun.
Of course. All right, we'll see you all in the next episode of the BrickSide Chat podcast.
Bye.